very brief recap. We have been through the 4 pillars. If you don't know the 4 pillars yet, because you came halfway through, you haven't seen the 4 pillars yet, then sessions 1 and 2, recorded versions, you need to see. Okay? Yeah. So with that, because those 4 pillars are really essential in a lot of these ethical dilemmas that you may need to talk about and respond to. So they may give you a scenario, right? A healthcare scenario, and you basically then have to talk about what the ethical situations are behind it. And by doing so, the best way to start is thinking, what pillars are in conflict of each other? Okay, so are there any pillars that we can remember? Maleficence, good. Maleficence. What was the word that I used with maleficence to make us remember what maleficence is?
Maltreatment. Yeah.
Maltreatment, if that helps, that's fine. That's a better one. I just say malice. But yeah, okay. So malice, which means doing harm. So non-maleficence is don't do any harm. And that's what the pillar is for the healthcare professions, okay? What else do we have? What are the other 4 pillars? Just to really recap.
Beneficence.
Beneficence. What's the word we use with beneficence to help us know what that big long word is?
Benefit.
Benefit. The good. Always do good as a healthcare profession. Okay? Yeah. What else have we got?
Something
Justice. Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. Can you remember what's involved with that?
Treating a patient, or treating all patients equally, regardless of.
And with fairness.
Yeah. With fairness.
And with where you do not discriminate in any way. Okay, due to whatever reason. Yeah. Okay.
Like no bias.
No bias. Exactly. So, like for example, if someone is going to, we talked about the idea of somebody was kind of like near to end of life, right? Compared to somebody that was healthy, it wouldn't be giving justice to treat the person who was not near the end of life, the one that was, obviously that had more years potentially to go. Okay? What we would do if we were in that situation, we had to work out with limited resources, we'd then use something else, a different type of a rule, and we're going to come on to rules today as well, right? We're going to go on to the idea of rules behind consequences, okay? All right, so it's a different strand of medical ethics that we're going to be looking at today. And there was another one, the very first ethic, the very first pillar, begins with A.
I know it's the right, like the what is called the
person's right to what? Everybody has
right to choose.
Choose what? Their treatment,
yeah,
okay, or their healthcare, okay.
Healthcare, yeah.
So that's autonomy.
Yeah. Oh yeah, autonomy. Yeah.
Right. Think of autonomous vehicles driving themselves. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So that a patient has the right for them to autonomously decide what treatments are viable for them, or what when given choices, to make their own choices rather than the doctor choosing for them. Okay. Mm-hmm. There are always exceptions, which we talked about. Those exceptions being if somebody is not within their right minds to make that decision.
Yeah.
So that's like somebody that may not be deemed legally old enough to make that decision. So like a 17-year-old might not be deemed to, right? Ironically, yet they may also be studying towards becoming a healthcare profession. Oh, that's not fair, because that's they may know more, exactly. So, but there are legal implications and laws to follow as well. But if it's deemed as, so then it would become the parents that make that decision on their behalf. But then if somebody doesn't have the ability to make that decision due to any kind of mental impairment, then the autonomous decision goes to the next of kin. Okay. Rather than the doctor. Okay, so that's just a very brief recap. And we talked about how those 4 different pillars, when you have 2 that are conflicting with each other, we have a dilemma, an ethical dilemma when they're in conflict. And so if given a situation in an interview, you need to highlight what are the pillars, why they're in contact, and try to come to terms with a solution based on the fact that you're discussing all of the issues that are involved, the pillars that conflict.
I see.
Okay? So that's the general kind of TLDR, too long didn't read, for the 4 pillars. Okay? And I set you some homework to do, didn't I?
Yeah, it was with the code.
The colours, did you do them? Okay, so consequentialism, okay, is what we are looking today. So we are moving past the 4 pillars and we're looking at consequentialism. So basically, consequences. See, I like to remember each of these kind of medical ethical terms, the terminology, by breaking it down into a shorter, smaller words that then helps me remember what it is. Okay, so consequences. Something happens as a result of something, right?
Yeah.
So if you have an issue, right, and you make a decision, your decision, you need to consider what the consequences are when you're making a decision to a situation. That's basically the premise of why we're looking at consequentialism.
Okay.
We're now talking about ethics. How do we view ethics, an
okay.
ethical situation? One way is to look at the 4 pillars. Another way is to look at it in terms of consequentialism. So we may have an issue and go, what are the consequences of a decision I make? Okay? And so one way to look at the decision, or what will happen as a result of a decision, is the end justifying the means? Okay?
Yeah.
So what we mean by that is the end justify? So the end, the result, will it justify why we make a certain decision? Will the consequence happen, right? And the way we go about and what decision we make has to consider that consequence. Okay? And remember, ultimately, we want to do the right thing for as many people as possible. So therefore, this is a consequence we need to consider.
So it's like determining the best course of action to take in a given circumstance.
Exactly. So, consequentialism, the end justifies the mean. It's the moral right, the morally right action that is the one that gives rise to the best consequences or outcome. So here's an example. I always try to, in a meeting or just in life, interaction with people, I always try to do the right thing by them. Make sure that they feel like they've been heard or their needs met out of any interaction that I have. Okay? Rather than the thing I could go around life just going, just thinking about the consequence of what's the best outcome for myself, right? And if it was, well, we'd be going home by now, because the best thing for me right now would just to go home, put my feet up, put the Netflix on, okay?
Yeah.
But that wouldn't be the morally right thing to do, would it? Okay, because it's just a random idea that I came up with. Just because, first of all, you guys are here with a need to and a want to learn. Okay, so actually, the right thing for me to do is to deliver on that promise for you guys, rather than just to go home and watch Netflix. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So that's me considering the best for other people, not necessarily the easiest or the best thing for me. Okay, the morally right thing. For example, so in the old days when I was a small kid, we used to have like a chalk board, right? And we used to rub out the board. We used to scribble on the board. 10 years old we were. Scribble on the board, right? In break time. And then there used to be these chalk duster board markers, right? And so lots and lots of those would be filled up on the chalk, right? Marker. And then during break time, kids would whack them and make a very dusty room, right? Like boom, 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 and the whole room is very dusty, right? So imagine a teacher just walks in. He goes, "Oh my goodness, who did that?" Right? Everyone sits down silently. Now, sitting down silently and looking at the teacher going, "I don't know." Now, morally, is that the right thing to do?
Depends on which side you're talking about.
Yeah, okay.
In terms of sawing your friend or
okay. So
the right decision.
The best decision for yourself, maybe, is to do what?
It's probably to not say anything.
Not to say anything, so you don't get in trouble.
Yeah, exactly.
As well as the best thing, thinking about your friends, is for you not to say anything, because then they don't get in trouble, as well as yourself.
Yeah.
Now, that's not the right thing. The right thing to do is to own up and then, maybe open the windows, apologize, and take whatever punishment is suited or fit or whatever from the teacher, right? That's the morally right thing to do. So then you learn your lesson, yada, 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 right? So what you decide in that situation is based upon the consequences. So you are using the potential consequences to inform what you're going to do. Yeah. Sorry, sir, it wasn't me. Right? That's one option. Consequences, well, probably I won't get in trouble, but maybe later on it might be worse. Who knows, right? The other one is okay, it was us, we're sorry, we'll fess up and fix it and hope that the act of doing something morally right works out beneficially for you. Does that make sense?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's what we're talking about when we're saying the morally right action that gives the best consequences or outcomes. Probably the best outcome is it will clear the air. You'll probably have a better lesson with the teacher afterwards if you say yes, fess up, right? Rather than create this whole kind of like issue with us and them and not telling them who did it and so on. And then there's this issue in the middle of the lesson going forwards. Right? Now, the action taken is justified as long as the consequences are for the greater good. So, for example, lying might be okay in some situations if it promotes a much better outcome than the truth. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean...
Let's use an example that will illustrate that more. Okay, so the 1940s Germany.
Whoa.
Oh, it's fantastic. Sorry. Okay. It's just 'cause I've seen the example somewhere and I thought actually it's a really vivid example that helps. Anne Frank, for example. Okay.
Yeah.
The SS, Nazi, coming in and they ask somebody, have you seen these people? Right? Some Jews that are hiding from the Nazis, right? And the person might actually know. They might be standing in front of the door in which they are behind, and they're like, no, they're lying. Lying is bad. But the resulting consequences, saving people's lives in place of a smaller misdemeanor of a lie, may actually be, it gives better consequences, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that's kind of what we mean by this. So the action is justified. So doing something that may not be morally super, super correct according to some rule book, as in lying is bad, for example, might actually be not as bad if the consequences are much better if it's done. Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. And we shall be going on to rules in a bit. So, however, this ethical theory is incomplete. Okay? Because now we've got the subjective problem of who decides what the best outcome is. In some examples, it's really obvious, right?
Yeah,
some
it's not.
So for example, the one that I just used with, Jewish people trying to be safe and someone lying, I mean, that's pretty obvious what the best outcome is, okay? But in some instances, it can start to get a little bit grey, okay? Which means that this whole, ethical theory of consequentialism and only looking at things based on the consequences isn't necessarily the best way to go about making decisions. Okay? Does that make sense? So I want you to take some time to give some examples, medical or otherwise, when the end justifies the means. So my end justifying the means is lying to save lives, for example, right? That was a good ends justifies means. Let's see if you can think of any times when the end justifies the decision that you're making.
I guess in the medical field, let's say, there's, you might use what is called medication that has a 50% chance of being the treatment for it, but has no side effects.
Okay.
In this case, you could say that I think we know what the treatment is, even though what is called might be a 50% chance. You're kind of
It
lying.
doesn't work?
Yeah, it doesn't work. You're lying because there are no side effects, but if the patient doesn't take it, they might be in the risk of
continuing with their illness or something.
Yeah,
Okay.
continuing with their illness, and there are no other side effects. So it is for the, I would say, the end justifies the means. In that
Okay, that was a creative example. Yeah.
Yeah, and even though it's sort of partially lying, it's not doing any harm, but then you're also in the gray area of you're kind of...
Are you giving something that is being placed and not actually doing what's good, even though that's what's expected, right? Yeah. Okay, so here are some examples that some previous students have come up with, right? So, animal testing for new pharmaceuticals, okay? Drug testing and the testing cycle, right? So, JF, that's me, Jeremy Forrester, to add in a PowerPoint on this, right? So, I'm just... That was notes from a previous year where I decided, right, I'll do a session on the drug testing cycle, okay?
Yeah.
So what does that mean? Well, let's look at it. We want new drugs, right? And by drugs, I mean pharmaceutical drugs.
Yeah.
Okay, we want like new medication, okay? And in order to do that, we have to test and test and test. And there's this whole testing cycle that you have to go through. If you remember in the coronavirus outbreak with the COVID-19, when there was all of this hoo-ha about it will take us years to get the vaccination.
Yeah.
Yes, it does normally. They bypassed a whole bunch of testing, which is why there was so much controversy over the vaccinations. Because usually in time they have like, large group. They start with a small, and then they increase the number of people that they try it with, and then they try it on a really big group in case there's a smaller percentile of the population that will be effective in a negative way for it.
Yeah.
Right. But remember, they had to worry about is the overall good going to justify the means when they decided to accelerate it through and do slightly less amounts of tests in order to get it certified through, or according to what some people are saying. Some people would say that actually they did do a good number of tests, right?
Yeah.
And they met the requirements of the testing cycle, but they just like sped it up because they did it in multiple places and stuff.
Time,
yeah, exactly, right. So, good memory. So, some pharmaceuticals include an animal testing stage, according to what it is, right? Some things can be checked for their efficacy. That means the effectiveness of it working on patients by using, mice, mammals, quite similar to us in terms of genetics and stuff. Okay, ironically, we're something like 97% similar to their DNA structure, right?
Yeah.
So we think we're so wildly different, but actually it's not, 96 or something. Funnily enough, I think we're about 90% the same DNA as a banana, but I've got to check that out, yeah? So,
yeah, I mean,
you've come across this, right?
Yeah, because, I mean, there's, like, also what is called multicellular, and there's just so many similarities.
Yeah, eukaryote and prokaryotes, and yeah.
It's
Okay.
the same branch, yeah.
So you get the idea. So animal testing is part of the testing cycle, right? Our minds are on the whole testing cycle, the importance of it. Sometimes, the good that many, like the... Oh, do you also remember learning about how, like, the majority of medicines going through this cycle do not actually even pass and then make it to market, right? So you've got so many medicines that don't make it to market, to the general population because they're not deemed to be safe enough while going through the cycle. It's a small percentage that actually get through, right? So think of all that testing that's happening on animals now then, bearing in mind of the sheer volume of different medications for different things that we have, and that we have different nations doing it, and that we have all of these different ailments and so on. And we have so many of those not getting through, yet look how many we already have. So that means there must have been way more animal testing, times it by a significant number of factors, in order to get to understand how much testing is happening on animals. That is not good. Would you agree? But if we look at it in terms of consequentialism, the ends justifying the means, although it's a bit of a grey area, remember, it's a grey area. It's not a complete ethical model because it's like, is it better that we've kind of sacrifice these animals here for a small majority of humans that are benefiting from a small number of medicines, right? But then it could be argued that, well, surely we must put more value on human life than animal life. So anyway, these are more dilemmas, right?
Yeah.
And the idea is that we are justifying the fact that we're helping people by doing cruel stuff to animals, basically. That's the point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Next one, stem cells, embryonic stem cell. Have they given consent? Right. So do we know what stem cells are?
Yeah, they essentially divide moving quicker than a normal cell because
Do we?
they're so
You need to use the word differentiation.
differentiate. Yeah.
Okay, let's go. Yeah, yeah.
I think do they differentiate 4 times?
Specialize.
They haven't specialized.
They
yet?
haven't specialized yet. They haven't differentiated and specialized to a specific role. So each cells in an embryo, which is the beginning part of before a fetus, right?
Yeah.
It's a ball of cells, an embryo. The embryonic cells are not differentiated. They haven't specialized to form different parts or organs or tissues yet. So they are literally like unspecialized cells, yet they have the ability to differentiate into a more specialized type of cell. So actually we actually use some of like that to help to support some regrowth in a bone or some kind of like tissue to help regrowth. So what those embryonic cells are doing is they are now, if attached to a certain area, able to then start to regrow multiple times, cell divide several times over, and then specialize to be the type of cell in which it's surrounded by. So if you've got like a serious lesion, for example, in the part of your body, it will then start to, those specialized cells, the stem cells can then be used to help with things like skin grafts and stuff, right?
Yeah.
To help become specialized skin cells. Okay? Now, there's a key term here, embryonic. That is the dilemma, because actually that's a living organism that hasn't quite yet developed into being old enough to be A, aware, first of all, but then B, give consent to say it's okay. Okay? Because I don't think any organism would generally say that's okay, right? Because we're instinctually survivalist animals, or instinctual survivalist beings. So there lies the dilemma. Now it's a bit more grey. Is that okay or is it not? Right? If we're looking at the end justifying the means, is the fact that we're helping somebody get over some sort of problem, some sort of major damage to their body, like a good enough reason or consequence for us to do the damage to the embryonic stem cell? Where are we getting the embryonic stem cells,
You could also make the argument that it's a bit more gray than animal testing, because like you said before, it's like us versus them. So it's like, this is our in-group and we're sort of damaging our in-group, whereas animal testing is sort of more your out-group. So it's like, it could be even more gray if you wanted to argue that. Yeah,
you could then start, using the idea of, they are also sentient beings as well. So like, who has the right, right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, good idea. Actually, they get the embryonic stem cells from, I hate to say this, wastage, biological wastage from IVF clinics. So actually, it can then be argued, well, those cells were not going to be used for anything anyway.
Oh yeah.
So that's another justification.
That would make it, I would say, that would make it
it's a bit more ethically viable, justifiable. Okay, good.
Yeah, it would make it more justifiable.
Okay. But still, there is a dilemma, and you can see the grey area. Okay? It's not a clear rule. Chemotherapy is painful. However, it's better than the alternative, right? The alternative, well, chemotherapy is obviously used to help those going through cancer patients.
Yeah.
Try and kill off the cancer cells, but at the same time, it's killing off those cells that the people have as well, their own personal cells. End justifying the means. Well, it depends on kind of like how painful those means are and how that chemotherapy is affecting that person, and whether or not the consequences are actually positive or not.
Yeah.
So we still don't actually quite know if those consequences are worth justifying the means. And every single person, you don't know until it happens. Do you remember we were talking about that idea of sometimes we don't know what the consequence will be?
Yeah.
Okay. So you get the idea there, right? So yeah, 47%. 47% is successful after 5 years. So we are still playing a bit of a gambling game there. Provision of a universal healthcare system for over a more private system. So think UK, NHS. Also, Canada has a very kind of universal style healthcare system. Okay, with a little bit of private that's added in over the top for specialists. And US. So open market business in the US enables more chance of more drugs being developed. That's a positive. NHS gives more provision to more people. Okay, I don't know. I'm not sure how this ties in there, but it's worth kind of like thinking about, finding out whether or not the end justifying the means of is taking money from patients and therefore having an open market business in the US healthcare system. An end justifying the means there because more drugs are being developed by having money going back into that. Or is it better to have more people provided for, so the consequences being everyone has access to the healthcare, although they may have to wait, right? But then where's the development coming from, right? Do you get it?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Also, another one is editing genes, genomes, so can help prevent genetic disease. So where you're coming up with designer babies or playing certain characteristics, but then it's like, is the consequences of playing around with the genetic makeup of humans justifying the end goal, which is just basically, in effect playing God, right? Yeah. So it's just another lens to look at it, all right?
Consequentialism. Consequentialism is an ethical theory that judges whether or not something is right by what its consequences are. For instance, most people would agree that lying is wrong. But if telling a lie would help save a person's life, consequentialism says it's the right thing to do.
That's where I got the example from.
2 examples of consequentialism are utilitarianism and hedonism. Utilitarianism judges consequences by a greatest good for the greatest number standard. Hedonism, on the other hand, says something is good if the consequence produces pleasure or avoids pain. Consequentialism is sometimes criticized because it can be difficult or even impossible to know what the result of an action will be ahead of time. Indeed, no one can know the future with certainty. Also, in some situations, consequentialism can lead to decisions that are objectionable, even though the consequences are arguably good. For example, let's suppose economists could prove that the world economy would be stronger and that most people would be happier, healthier, and wealthier if we just enslaved 2% of the population. Although the majority of people would benefit from this idea, most people would never agree to it. However, when judging the idea solely on its results, as classic consequentialism does, then the end justifies the means.
Consequentialism is a type of normative ethical theory. Such theories provide criteria for moral evaluation and may also recommend rules or decision procedures for people to follow in acting morally. Consequentialism, in its most general form, holds that the moral quality of an action is completely determined by its consequences. There are variations on this theme. For example, we might be evaluating character traits instead of actions, or we might be evaluating actions in terms of the consequences of adopting a set of rules that prescribe those actions. The common thread, however, is that moral quality is a function of consequences and nothing else. Traditionally, consequentialist theories of moral evaluation have two parts. One part is an account of what is good, and the other part an account of how to approach the good, which underlies the attribution of deontic properties to the action, such as the property of being right. For example, the most well-known version of consequentialism is hedonistic act utilitarianism, which holds that the right action is the action that maximizes pleasure, the action that has the best overall consequences in terms of the production of pleasure. Here, the theory of the good is hedonism, which is the view that pleasure is the one intrinsic good, and the approach to pleasure is to maximize it or to produce as much of it as possible. Suppose a doctor, Martha, has a dose of medicine that is just enough to save the life of one person, Steve. To save Steve, she would need to use the entire dose of medicine. However, there are 5 other people who need much smaller doses in order to be saved. She could instead divide the medicine into 5 smaller doses and save them instead of Steve. The utilitarian would view the right action as the action with the best consequences, and so Martha should use the medicine to save 5 rather than just 1. The guiding idea is that the point of morality is to make the world a better place. Consequentialism is contrasted with theories of moral evaluation that either hold that consequences are not relevant in determining the moral quality of one's actions, or that consequences are only partly relevant, and that other considerations matter in determinations of moral quality. Very few believe that consequences are not at all relevant. However, there are very many moral theorists who believe consequentialism is incorrect because it reduces the moral quality of an action to the goodness of its consequences. For example, I have moral reason to keep a promise, even if the promise does not promote the good. The reason is simply that I made the promise. If I break a promise, I have done something wrong, even if the consequences of breaking the promise are slightly better than the consequences of keeping the promise. Maximizing forms of consequentialism are thought to be overly demanding. If the right action for me to perform is the one among the options open to me that produces the most good, and if failure to produce the most good is therefore wrong, then many of our ordinary actions are wrong. For example, if I buy a bagel every morning for breakfast rather than make my own toast at home, then I am spending money on a bagel that I could be spending to do something else that, morally speaking, is better. I could save my bagel money and send it to Oxfam and use the money to save people's lives. And this is true for very many of the purchases that people in affluent countries make. Thus, maximizing forms of consequentialism, such as utilitarianism, seem to be morally very demanding. To avoid this problem, some consequentialists hold that the right action need not maximize the good. Instead, the right action is the action that produces enough good. This is called satisficing consequentialism. However, this approach seems odd since maximizing seems to be rationally required by the observation that more good is surely better than less good.
Okay, so examples of the different types of consequentialism aims at defining what the best outcome is. So we've got utilitarianism, okay, which is where we look at the best outcome being which promotes the most happiness or pleasure and the absence of pain. We've been through those already, right? You've seen this already, then the hedonism, right? Here we've got egoism and altruism. So we've got ethical egoism, which is quite selfish, ego, you know, thinking about yourself, selfishness, okay? Choosing the action that is best for oneself. This can have a positive, negative, or neutral effect on everybody else. So if your focus is, I'm going to make a decision that's best for myself, then we would say that was an ethical egoism, or a very selfish approach. Now, there may be further consequences on that decision, some positive to other people, or they might be negative to other people, or may not affect other people. But if the only focus is the self, then that's where this situation comes into play. Okay? And then we've got ethical altruism, or selflessness, choosing the action that benefits others' well-being apart from oneself. We also need to look at the idea of rule consequentialism. Consequentialism at its core is in promoting maximum good, but with certain rules. So if we are looking at consequentialism in general, it's like, let's make the best good. That would be a good way to go in the approach of doing consequentialism if I'm a healthcare professional.
Yeah.
However, like, surely we also need some rules with that as well. Okay? So we've got certain fundamental rules that are seen as being important to follow. Now, this bit's confusing. How do you choose those rules? Rules that are chosen will... so the rules that are chosen to be followed will be based on the consequences that those rules give. Oh, crazy. Right? So you might have like a set of rules in the US, you might have a set of rules in the UK. Some of those rules will be very similar, but some of them will be slightly different for various reasons. Maybe different kind of perceptions on certain consequences may be slightly different due to cultural backgrounds and so on, okay?
Just like kind of
environmental.
Law.
Or due to law as well, right? But this is, it's kind of, we're going into a grey area with law, but really we're talking about the rules that go along with consequentialism that are chosen based on how those rules will affect the outcomes.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? It's not quite like the law itself. We get to law later. Okay. So that was rule consequentialism that we just kind of like moved towards, right? So rule consequentialism is like a combination of consequentialism and rules, or another word for those rules, duty-based ethics. Duty-based ethics. So duty-based ethics now brings us on to our next section, deontology. Deontology. Now, by the way, the spelling's slightly incorrect in the heading here. It's D-E-O-N-T.
Oh, okay.
It's spelled correct throughout the rest. Okay.
Because I thought it had something to do with dentistry.
Yeah. Deontology rather than dentology. Deontology. And so this is an ethical theory that suggests an individual should act based on what they believe to be morally right, regardless of the consequences. It's kind of like the opposite of what we've just been looking at. We're thinking, we should make decisions only based on the consequences.
Yeah.
This is saying, now make decisions based only on the rules. And the rules are do the right thing.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So irrespective of whether or not the right thing will be good or bad, it doesn't matter. Just do the right thing blindly.
In terms of, is it from the medical side or from the patient? Like, do they choose what?
Just as a theory in general.
Oh, okay.
A decision is made based on what is the right decision
I see.
for, for a guide, whatever that moral guide is. Okay? So, according to deontology, the rightness or the wrongness of an action is determined by its inherent nature. Like, its inherent nature. Is it the right thing because, as a principle, it's the right thing? Okay? Like, it's the principle of it being good or bad. And it cannot be affected by, what happens as a result of doing it, all right? So that means morally right action should be performed even if an immediate result of it's negative, a bad thing happens as a result.
I see.
So really, this is not necessarily always the best thing, obviously, but it's an ethical theory to be aware of that you need to know. So let's look at some examples. We've got honesty and we've got humility there. Humility, much to my own detriment, I'm quite humble about stuff that I do, sometimes. I think, right? I don't feel like I big up all the things I do. I don't hardly touch social media. I don't go, yeah, did you see this amazing fair we've done? high five and thank you all for coming and all this. I individually email them and show like the universities my appreciation, and then I thank the students and I do all of that. But I don't make this big look at me, look at what I've done business, right?
Yeah.
Because I don't think that's the right thing to do. But I see other college counsellors in the world on social media doing that, and I'm like, all you did is have a university visit. I mean, like, no need to big that up. It's like, as long as you're doing the right thing for the students and everyone's happy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So humility, right? I think myself, it's the right thing for me to do, not to make a big deal and go, wow, look at how good this was or what we did, right? Yeah. However, maybe I would benefit more from it. Maybe I'll get a promotion if I was to go around going, wow, this is something we did. And then people would be a lot more aware of it, right? Yeah. But deontologically speaking, doing the right thing according to the principle of doing the right thing, in my mind, in this instance, is the right thing to do, for example, right? Yeah. Even though, do you get the idea? So we're going showing modesty and not taking credit for something that you feel that you don't deserve, right? It would be wrong to accept a prize when you feel like somebody else did better. Or even if you feel like you deserved it, to a certain degree, right? Yeah. It's just like, some people live by that, Honesty, telling the truth no matter what. I mean, so the honesty bit, I come across people that are just too blindly honest. There are certain cultures where I've noticed that this is a little bit more prevalent, shall we say, right? Yeah. So I'm not going to name cultures. I'm just going to say that I've travelled a lot and I've been to some places where people have sounded quite harsh about certain attributes that they are observing in me and in others. And I'm like, whoa, easy. A little white lie wouldn't hurt. And they're like, well, no, that would not be the truth. Right? So I'm like, yeah, okay. Oh, so okay. In that case, their value and belief, deontologically speaking, was honesty is just the most important thing. Right? Honesty despite exactly, the best policy, despite its consequences. So, for example, if I've eaten far too many Mars bars one night, for example, and I may see some people of that kind of, like mentality towards this concept, shall we say, from, and they may say, look, you look like you've put on a lot of weight, Mr. Forrester, the next day. I'll be like, white lie wouldn't have hurt you, would it? Okay, you get the idea.
Definitely not a personal story.
Not a personal story, no, not at all. So, duty-based theories, deontology, right? Okay, so these are fundamental rules and duties to follow, right? So, deontology is basically the rules we were talking about. Yeah. Now, sometimes we need to think about the consequences of those rules, don't we? Don't you think it's a bit like crazy to blindly follow like the no lying thing? Yeah. Right? Sometimes. For example, right? So actually we're looking at two polar opposites. We've got deontology, all right, where it's like only think about the rules and the duties that you have to follow. And then the consequentialism is only thinking about the results of your decisions that you're making. So really, we should have some kind of balance between the two, shouldn't we, really? Yeah. Yeah? So, these are rules. This is because certain acts are seen as wrong no matter what the consequences are, as we've seen. So an example is killing somebody for their organs or transplantation in many other individuals. The killing is wrong, so therefore, killing somebody for their organs is obviously something that you shouldn't be doing in order to benefit maybe like 5 or 6 different people for 5 or 6 different organs that they need. Yeah. Right? So actually, sometimes these blind rules of following need to be weighed up. This is definitely a rule that should be taken seriously and put into someone's moral compass over the greater good. Because actually, this whole notion of thinking about the greater good and the consequences is your focus. That would work in this case, wouldn't it? Right? Oh, well, the end justifies the means. If this person is killed for their organs, so therefore, like 5 more people have those organs, don't you see the kind of the weird conflict there?
It's like the trolley problem.
The trolley problem, yes, that was on the video.
Yeah.
Did you see the video? Was that on the? I didn't edit that one. Have you seen the trolley video?
I just thought of the trolley problem.
Oh, you know it.
Yeah.
Ah, we saw it last week, didn't we?
Yeah, we did.
Ah, so that will, so when that video 2 is edited, you'll see that trolley problem. Yeah. Okay, so. But conflicts occur when one has multiple duties to follow in a given scenario too. Here's the issue. So sometimes people have multiple duties which all have separate kind of conflicting requirements in a given situation. Okay? And then we go on. Right, so this is your homework. Research these types of ways in dealing with conflicts. So we've got Gant's moral theory. We've got modern duty-based theories. We've got prima facie duties based on the actions. So we've got, duties categorically imperative. We've got duty-based theories, and then we've got duty based on actions. Okay? So basically, the idea is to be able to make a slide for each of those. Okay? It just needs a couple of sentences to explain it, and then maybe next time you'll be able to explain those to me.
Sure.
Okay? As well as those coloured ones that you're going to look at from the video. Okay.
Definitely.
So that's the homework. And before you go away, once you've finished writing that down, I'm going to show a final video on deontology to bring it to life a little bit more. Here you go. I like these little ones here.
Deontology. Deontology is an ethical theory that uses rules to distinguish right from wrong. It is often associated with philosopher Immanuel Kant. Kant believed that ethical actions follow universal moral laws, such as don't lie, don't steal, don't cheat. Deontology is simple to apply. It just requires that people follow the rules and do their duty. This approach tends to fit well with our natural intuition about what is or isn't ethical. Unlike consequentialism, which judges actions by their results, deontology doesn't require weighing the costs and benefits of a situation. This avoids subjectivity and uncertainty because you only have to follow set rules. Despite its strengths, rigidly following deontology can produce results that many people find unacceptable.
We've kind of explored some of
For
this.
example, suppose you're a software engineer and learn that a nuclear missile is about to launch that might start a war. You can hack the network and cancel the launch, but it's against your professional code of ethics to break into any software system without permission. And it's a form of lying and cheating. Deontology advises not to violate these rules. However, in letting the missile launch, thousands of people will die. So, following the rules makes deontology easy to apply. But it also means disregarding the possible consequences of our actions when determining what is right and what is wrong.
Okay, that will do for today. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for coming. It's been a pleasure.